Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'll let everybody come in from the waiting room and we will be getting started right here at 9:30. It's one of my favorite things is to see where everybody's from and what your job is. So if you're willing to share where you are signing in from today and what your role is, I would love to see that as we get started today. You just put that in the chat. We'll let everybody come on in. And we will get started in just a minute. Good morning, Jen. Coming from St. Paul. Okay, New Ulm. Okay, Jacksonville, North Carolina from Corinne. Good morning. Charlotte, North Carolina. Okay, we got Minnesota and North Carolina represented so far. Or anybody else? Andover, welcome, Kelsey. Becky from Byron, Chicago, Wisconsin. Awesome. Okay, so we got Midwest and North Carolina this morning. Good morning, Chandra. Regina from Topeka, Kansas. Great. Thanks for satisfying my curiosity where everybody is logging in from. I appreciate it. My name is Denise Moody, and we are here today at one of the monthly trainings that Resilience Impacts offers. So we put a training out every month focusing on some topic around social emotional learning, mental health, and trauma-informed practices. So today we are talking about supporting educator well-being, and we are going to jump right in. I know that everybody's time is really valuable right now, and so being able to carve out some time, I really appreciate you spending just a few minutes with us today. I think we'll be running about 40 minutes around content. We'll see how it goes, but we are going to kind of go through because I know your time is valuable, and I am going to be sharing a resource with you at the end that Resilience Impact has to offer around supporting educator well-being. And so I hope both this training and all the content we're going to be covering and that resource might be something that is helpful to you. So with that, we will get going here. Clean up my screen. So I also have Leslie Gunn with me today, so she might be popping in the chat, giving us some links. So she's our Director of Operations with Resilience Impact. So feel free to private message her if you have something that you have a question about, or feel free to just put in the chat if it's okay that everybody sees it. So today we're going to talk about supporting staff as they navigate through stress and fatigue. And we're going to be talking about it from a unique perspective, I think, around thinking about how do we do that as a community. That it's not the school leader or the supervisor or central office that is really saying, how do we support well-being, but how do we as a community come together to do that? And how do we create a menu of options for people? Because we know that what works for me might not work for Regina, might not work for Kelsey. And so we all have kind of what works for us, and how do we create a menu of options? So it's with that perspective that we'll be going through today, is how as a community do we come together and share, and how do we create a menu of options based on what different people need. So we do have a certificate of attendance that we will be putting in the chat for you at the end. If you are watching this on the replay, we will be emailing that out to you. Hopefully that's helpful for you as you are working on relationship. So we are going to jump right in, and we're going to talk about a virtual check-in. So I want this to be full of tangible ideas that you can use. So this is something that I have used in the past, and I thought it would be a good place for us just to start quickly about something to think about how do we build that sense of community in the limited amount of time that we have available. So a check-in is something that I got the idea from a company called Character Strong, and was something that I used when we were in a distance learning format and we were doing virtual. But it also works once we are back in buildings, because we also know that our time is still limited. And for those of you that are in the building with staff that you support, it doesn't mean that you have time to talk to them during the day. And I know some of you might not be in the same building or in multiple buildings. So this is a way to just have a quick touch point with people about how are you doing and what do you need. And so it's important as you would approach this with people and think about using this to communicate your purpose, that this is not meant to be any sort of gotcha, or, this is really is around your authentic caring for them and creating that community within your school. Anything that they tell you is going to be confidential. Please only share what you feel comfortable sharing. There's no requirement that you share something that you're not comfortable with. And then it's important to talk about what's the follow-up that you need. Sometimes people just need to say, you know what, it's not a great week. I have some other resources that I'm doing, but just so you know, like, I'm struggling this week, but I don't really need anything right now. And there's a couple of options on the form that we'll talk a little bit about asking what they need, but it's an important message of following up, of matching what that response might be to what they need, because it's different for everyone. And so Leslie is going to put a link to this in the chat. It's going to pop up with a Google form, and you're going to be able to copy that and make your own version, change these questions, do what makes sense for you, if that's something that you find helpful. There are a few questions that it's simple. You'll see it's just, what is this? 5 things, including your name. So we have, what's your name? How are you doing in this moment? Like, for real, tell me how it's going. And so from a scale of not so great to awesome. And then what's the story behind that number? Why did you choose that number you selected? Totally optional. You don't want to fill that in, that's fine. And then that question about how can I support you? And you can see a few of the options I have there about, I'd appreciate a phone call. Can you just give me a quick call or stop by my room? I'd like to schedule a meeting. So whether that's in person or a virtual check-in. I think an important one too, as we focus on this idea of community, is we need some extra time together as a team. Can we pull the team together? Maybe there's something going on with a student or family, or something that happened in your building, or something that, there was a death or a trauma or an illness with one of your families, and we just need some time to get them together and process that. So the idea of can we pull together with you as a team? I could use some encouragement, or the last option of, just please keep me in your thoughts. I don't need anything right now, but appreciate you checking in. And then the last question is, there's somebody you might need extra support. Sometimes it might not be that individual that day, but I do see that my teammate could use just a touch point or a place of encouragement. Oh, let me go back. So just to wrap this up, so some things to think about when you are thinking about, might this be a strategy I want to try? Start small, right? The last thing you want to do is send it to your old staff and then not have the time to follow up. So I would think about, if you're thinking of using this, who do I not naturally maybe have a touch point with during my normal week? So maybe that is the clerical staff in your office. Like, you see them all the time, but you don't necessarily get a chance to check in and just say, okay, how are you really doing? Or maybe it's the paraprofessional staff, or maybe it's the nutrition or maintenance staff. Maybe it's a certain level team that is kind of struggling, and you just want to have more of touch points with them. So I would think about, like, what might be a small group that you would want to focus on to see if this is a good fit for you in your own style and in your building culture. Also think about timing. I think in our week, there's kind of this natural energy flow that goes, and like most people are coming in Monday morning and feeling okay. I know for me, I hit like Tuesday late afternoon and my energy is low, right? The week's kind of tasks are overwhelming me. I thought it was going to be a different week and things haven't went as planned, and yet the weekend seems a long ways away. So I would think about, like, where's the energy? When do you want to be intentional about having that touch-in point? And then also the timing about when can you schedule some follow-up? When might you have a half an hour to look through those responses and send some quick emails and do a couple quick calls, or just visits in classrooms? And then throughout this, I would encourage the group to rely on each other. you might want to do this as a team and do kind of an open response. So it's not you as the person necessarily spending it out, but anybody can see the responses. And it can be a way of communicating and also kind of looking at the flow of, is this kind of a natural progression? Is something else going on with the energy of the team and the well-being of the team? So something to consider as you're thinking about educator resilience, just a quick thing that I've used that I wanted to share with you to see if you might think it's helpful. So back into the content here. So as I was thinking about this training and pulling this together, I was thinking about like, okay, who am I talking to here? And there are kind of 3 reasons that I think you might have shown up. So I want you, as I go through these, to think about, like, okay, this applies to me or this doesn't. I'd appreciate like I think most of these apply to me personally, so hopefully they resonate with you too. But just want to get a read on kind of what brought you here today. So reason number 1 is that you're feeling overwhelmed with the needs of students. And then on top of that, the staff, and are feeling crushed under the weight of the emotional burden of caring for them. I had a conversation with a staff member this week who said, okay, I can do the kid things, right? Like, that's my job, I'm here for it. But adding on top caring for staff is kind of what's pushing me over the edge. So maybe that's you too. Another reason why I think you might be here today is that you find yourself struggling with your own ability to empathize. And you feel it in yourself, and you can hear your inner dialogue, and it's becoming more jaded and more cynical. And your internal dialogue of response is very different than maybe what it was 2 years ago. And you don't really like that that's who you are, that's what your inner dialogue is, and you're becoming a little bit more cynical and jaded, but that's just the reality of where you are. And I hope that isn't just me. Third reason that maybe brought you here today is that you've tried to engage with staff. You've tried to do these things. You wanted to do their needs. You want to address their needs. And that every time you try to do that, the conversation kind of quickly tanks, and you end up feeling like, ugh, that wasn't helpful. It kind of goes to negativity and complaining. So I'm curious, do any of those resonate with you? You can put a 1, 2, 3 in the comments if you feel like you kind of go through all of them. Curious to know kind of where you might land. You can put that in the chat. 1 and 3, 1 and 2. Thanks, Alyssa. Thanks, Kim. Kelsey, 2 and 3. Okay, 3. Yep. I don't want to get to 2, but I've been there. Yeah, I know. It's a red flag to me too when I'm having those days that I need to take care of myself, really. So awesome. 1 and 3. Okay, great. Okay. Well, I hope that you find this information helpful that we're going to go through today. Sounds like you're feeling similar to me in many ways, and that this resonated. So a little bit about me quickly. Again, my name is Denise Moody. I am a licensed independent clinical social worker and adolescent therapist. I have 20 years of experience working in a school setting and currently work as a central office administrator in a student services department. In addition, I run a small business called Resilience Impact, where we do training on trauma-informed practices, mental health, SEL, and educator well-being. We host several conferences each year and put out these monthly trainings. So glad you're here today. Thanks for following the work that I do, and hopefully you will find this helpful. So as I think about a theme for today, this was kind of how my summary of where we were going, that your role as a school leader, or your role as the school counselor or school social worker, or whatever your role is in caring for people in your buildings, is not to have all the answers or be the emotional support person for everyone on your staff, because that's not possible right now. But can we help create some resources and some structure about creating community in your school that builds resilience? So it's the shift from caregiver to community builder that I want to focus on today. So we're going to talk about I call them 3 mistakes, 3 things that I see happen in buildings that maybe not just buildings, maybe overall with like leaders and caring for other people, and what to do instead. So we're going to talk about toxic positivity, a hyper focus on student needs, and this draw to fix the problem, and what some alternatives might be. And then I'm going to talk about a resource that Resilience Impact offers called the Educator Resilience Blueprint, and how that might be a strategy or one of those things on that menu for building community at your school to support educator well-being. As we go through this content, I was intentional about trying to bring some new things in. So I'm bringing some things in from the business world and from the field of psychology, and bringing in some of that research that has happened in other fields and seeing about how that applies to school. And does that help provide a shift or open up some new ideas about how we might address the issues of burnout and fatigue that we're seeing across educational staff right now. So you'll see, I hope that some of this information is maybe a little new to you, and because it's coming from some other fields beyond education. So let's get started. Here we go. So mistake number one I see is promoting toxic positivity. And so I want to start just with a quick story. When I first started in education back early 2000s, I had worked professionally in another field. And my first school that I was in was very eye-opening in some of the culture things that we had in our building. And I was surprised about how much negativity was coming towards the principal and how bold people were in saying that. And the response of this principal was interesting, and because there was always a smile on her face. There was always these kind of bubbly kinds of things to say. It was always upbeat. It was always cheerful. To the point, it just made me go, ugh, like, don't you understand that people are really upset and they're saying these somewhat mean things to you, and you're smiling and have this cheerful look on your face that doesn't match at all. And I think what happened was that staff were feeling unheard. And so they kept saying things louder and more insistently and more boldly. And yet the response of this leader was this kind of cheerful, invalidating response. And it was an icky place to work because of that, right? It didn't feel like we were communicating. It didn't feel like we were there. And I later kind of got some words to describe what that experience was for me. And I believe it was toxic positivity. It was this always being happy, even when things were not good. It wasn't authentic and it wasn't real happipiness. So Vanessa Van Edwards from the website Science of People, she has a book as well. She's from the field of psychology and does a lot of work in business. She's a great read and really fun to read and entertaining. But she describes this as the act of feeling happy or cheerful when you're not. It's that fake kind of happiness when people say things to you like, just cheer up, or it'll get better, don't worry. When something really bad has happened, like this isn't a cheer up moment, but yet that's the response you're getting. So toxic positivity is an inauthentic happiness, and it causes damage in personal and professional relationships. And that's what had happened in that first experience in a school I had, that inability to go like, okay, you're right. This isn't good and this isn't working for you. Let's figure out how to solve that. It instead became this environment that was not supportive or helpful. And I think that leaders often feel, and staff sometimes feel, they come into this idea like, well, I don't want to be negative all the time. But I think it's more about how do we be authentic? How do we understand and accept that what's going on right now is hard? So I'm curious, can you relate? Can you give me a yes in the chat if you've had that experience with someone in your life? You've got somebody in your life now or in the past who has had some of that toxic positivity. You can relate to that feeling of like, ugh. You can give me a yes in the chat if that's something that resonates. Yes. Okay. Amy, Denise, Jen. Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's an ick feeling. And I think it's helpful to, sometimes you're not sure what's going on. Like, well, they're always helpful, but I think having a kind of a term for that and knowing what that is, it's demoralizing. Yes, Kelsey. Oh no, I just lost my screen. Okay, there we go. So there's two types of toxic positivity. So I've been talking about this idea when there's somebody else who's kind of telling you to just cheer up. But there's also this, you can do it to yourself. So I think some of us that have maybe been raised or kind of has been taught to us that, that some of our inner dialogue should be that you're not allowed to maybe feel some of these feelings that are uncomfortable. And if you feel uncomfortable feelings like being angry or being mad or being sad or being discouraged, the appropriate response is to just shove those down and internally even have that dialogue of like, it's going to be okay, or be grateful for what you have, or just be glad you have a job, or it could be so much worse, right? And so we sometimes do toxic positivity to ourselves. And in the concept of educator well-being, there's actually studies that say, when it was a study around people who were given, like a tough diagnosis, and there was one group that was able to kind of accept it and be able to be upset about it, and one group that kind of denied that existence. And the people long-term, the people who were able to accept that and talk through it and be upset had better outcomes than those who didn't. And so there is a toll that comes in our bodies and in our own resilience when we're not able to just be authentic and really feel those uncomfortable feelings. Even though they're uncomfortable in the moment, that's the only way that we can work through them. And so an analogy I have, or actually, I think I got this from Vanessa Van Edwards as well, of the negativity jar buildup. We all have negative thoughts. There are negative things that are happening in our lives every day. And so we can keep putting things in that jar, but eventually they come out, right? And so here's another thing. So we all have negative things that have happened, especially over the last 2 years. And some of them, we know that other people have had it worse. We know that we may still be very privileged compared to many, but it's still hard. And it's okay to accept, to recognize that and accept that. And if we don't, and we kind of send either from outside people or internally these messages of, it's going to be fine, it's going to be fine. What happens is sometimes there's this explosion. Those negative feelings are going to come out, and usually in a way that are much more harmful, either to your professional relationships, to your own mental health, than had you address them in small bits. And so I also think this is a helpful analogy because sometimes I have been on the receiving end of that negativity jar buildup. And I think school systems or leaders or sometimes feel this too, like sometimes it's like one decision that maybe is similar to others, or it's like, why is there such a big reaction to this thing? And I think that this is part of it, is that instead of just being authentic and talking about what's been hard and being able to process those emotions over time. And I think we've all had this idea that, okay, I can just wait this out, right? We've all been trying to wait this out and it's going to be over soon. And here we are almost 2 years later, and that hasn't come true. And so I think sometimes the skills that we've used in the past are ineffective during this current situation in education and in the world. So, curious again, have you had experiences this year that the analogy of that negative buildup jar help explain, whether it's with families, whether it's with students? I definitely think we see this with students who haven't maybe had an outlet to share those experiences and don't have the skills in order to do that. We see that kind of coming out sideways. So just curious if you've had experiences that this helped explain. Yeah, definitely with students, right? I think we see, right, they just don't have the skills, and we haven't had the opportunity to develop those with them. Yep, and staff. Yep. Okay. Well, I hope that's kind of a helpful analogy for you to kind of wrap your brain around what might be happening. And I think also to use with students, right? I think that the importance of processing emotions over time, even though sometimes it feels really uncomfortable for all people and students, the importance of being able to do that. So do this instead. So I see your comment, Amy, about this is what I'm suggesting instead, is this idea of conscious vulnerability. So we can't go around all day processing our feelings, right? There's a lot of work to be done. It's a busy environment that we work in schools. There are a lot of needs. But consciously being vulnerable when the time is appropriate and when there is space to do that, to disclose your personal struggles in an intentional way to build trust and normalize emotional expression. And again, this can't be one person. This is about a community. How as a community do we normalize this idea of like, okay, this is what's hard for me right now, or this is where I'm struggling, or when you did this to me, this is how it made me feel, right? Some of those just being able to be really honest and be willing to take off our armor, to use a Brene Brown term, to take off our armor for a little bit and just share how that is and how much that can have an impact on our own resilience and on our own well-being, is the ability to do that selectively in a place where you feel safe and authentic. So this is a quote from Cristina de la Huerta, and she says, when we make ourselves open and vulnerable, behaving in a way that extends and elicits respect, that tends to generate the same in each other's. So this has a cumulative effect. How we build this into our culture, how we build this into our professional relationships, how we build this into relationships, I think it applies to students and families too. Like, how do we create a situation where there's some reciprocity in a really intentional way, right? Like, I'm not saying we're going to go around and talk about our feelings all day. There's some people where it's not safe to do that, but how do we find those spaces where it is? And that's part of where we're going to kind of end up too, is with the Educator Resilience Blueprint, that's a way to help create those authentic spaces for people to be able to have some of that authentic sharing. Knowing we are not alone and that others are also feeling the same way is so powerful. We're going to talk about fixing it, but like, we can't fix this, right? So being able to be in this together is a powerful way that we can build resilience. We want to share our hard days and help each other carry the emotional burden of this work. So curious, what is a way that you could choose to practice conscious vulnerability? Is this like, okay, I didn't have the term for it, but this is how I've been using that? I'm curious to know in the chat if this matches something that you've been doing, or a practice that you've had, or an opening at a staff meeting, or. So I'm going to be watching the chat here for just ideas about what that might be. If anybody has something they want to share. So maybe we can come back to that. If you have something you want to share with the group. I model when leading a listening circle. Yeah, listening circles, right? It's simple, right? It's a simple strategy, but is really powerful. Yes, with those new teachers and mentees. Okay, awesome. Okay, great ideas, that things that people are happening on in their schools. Yep, circles. Great. Okay. Okay, we're going to go to mistake number 2, is around a hyper focus on student needs. We have sayings in schools that are part of our culture that permeate kind of all levels of geographic areas, with things like we're all in for kids, or that the needs of students come first, or even the idea that we're student focused. In the district where I work, we had awards called Above and Beyond awards. And it always made me wonder a little bit, above and beyond what, and the piece that I always fill in, which I appreciate people who want to give of their time and their effort and resources to be able to do things for kids, and applaud them for their work. But I think sometimes by elevating them to the example, or kind of the the thing that we should be following. We're saying above and beyond what you're getting paid for, above and beyond what your boundaries should allow, above and beyond to the point that your maybe family or your personal health are sacrificing. And I know that's maybe not a super popular thing to say, but I think we have to focus on, yes, we want to be student focused in our decisions, right? We don't want to be prioritizing staff over students, but there is danger in always focusing on student needs, right? Because it can be a reason for any boundary that you might have around your own personal health to be broken, right? Like I could go to the gym, but there's something I can do for students. I could eat my lunch. I could go to the bathroom, but like, oh, this student needs me in the moment. And I'm going to guess every single person in here has been guilty of sacrificing their own needs. And there is a time and a place for that. And that's why you're in this field. But when we over and over and over look past our own needs, and I'm talking simple things like leaving at a decent time, not, engaging with your family in the evening instead of working, about eating lunch, about going to the bathroom an appropriate number of times per day, drinking enough water. When we sacrifice those things for students, it's just not sustainable. We humans are not made that way, right? There has to be a balance. And so what happens when we have a hyper focus on student needs? It's always about what students need. It leads to this grind culture, right? We just got to keep doing more and doing more and doing more and doing more. There's no end to the needs, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much time, how much you give of yourself. There is always more that could be done and more to give. And so when we put that up as the example, as the thing that like, oh, they're the good teacher, this idea that we have in education about they're the ones that are doing all the things, so therefore they're the good teacher. And we dismiss this idea that you can be a good teacher and still eat lunch and still be a great mom and still do all the things. We create this grind culture, which is very harmful for educators and makes their involvement in the profession unsustainable. I think it's one reason why we see such a large number of educators that are indicating that they want to leave the profession, and many of them are leaving. So I wanted to share a piece of research from you from Leader and Maslow. So they are researchers in the business organization world, and they this is a piece from 2004, and they identified, I think there's seven risk factors for burnout. And I want you, as we're going through those, to think about how many of these are present in your building. Heavy workload, conflicts with coworkers, diminished resources, so doing more with less, a lack of control or input, when there's no ability to be part of the decisions, it feels like all the decisions are being done to you. When there is an imbalance between effort and reward. I'm doing all of these things, and yet the payoff. So whether, in an educational setting, that could be that I'm working really hard on my lessons, but yet the students aren't engaging in them, or the students, where I'm not seeing the reading gains that I want. So there's this imbalance that's happening there. You're not getting the results you want for the amount of effort that you're putting in. When there's understaffing, it's a chronic issue right now in schools. And then there's rapid institutional changes. Things are changing so fast and you can't quite keep up. So I'm curious, in the comments, how many of those factors fit with your school this year? With your school over the last 2 years, maybe? Yeah, seems like you just described the conditions of our field, right? All of them. That's why this piece of research was so stunning to me. As I read it, I was like, oh, no wonder we are experiencing some of this. Great. There's some of you that are only feeling 4 or 5. Still a significant risk, right, for the individuals in your organization to be experiencing some of that burnout. So I don't have a slide on this, but I feel the need to talk to you a little bit about burnout. So burnout is this idea of that happens when you're doing too much with too little for too long. It's part of this kind of grind culture that I was talking about. It's like you have to keep doing too much over time. And we can all do that for short periods of time, right? Like, okay, let me get in, let me figure this out. I'm willing to put the extra hours. But it's that doing too much for too long without enough support. And that's when we get to burnout. And so when we have those organizational risk factors that are in place and they go on for too long, that's when those that work in that system are going to start experiencing burnout. And so I think instead of this idea of this hyper focus on student needs, and I'm not saying student needs aren't really important, they are, but we have to have some balanced support. We have to support our students and we have to support our staff. So we have to figure out how to balance that. And so I want to share with you one model, again, from the business world, organizational research. And it was originally developed by Carousel in 1979 and then expanded by Johnson and Hall in 1988. And it's kind of the dominant model in occupational stress over the last 3 decades. And I see your comment, Michelle. That's great. So the idea of burnout versus demoralized, and burnout, and it seems to imply that the individuals at fault for not taking care of themselves. I think when I read the research, I have a different sense of that because I don't think that's what in the research, but I can understand that that might be the implication or the kind of the layman's understanding of that term. But I love the word demoralized as well. So I want to talk a little bit about this demand support or demand control and support model, and just helping you kind of understand how this is. So on the y-axis, you can see here we have low to high. So this is when you have control around your work, when you're able to make the decisions, when you're able to have some autonomy in your work. So whether you have lots of autonomy or low autonomy. So autonomy seems like a better word to me, but it's this idea of controlling how you spend your time, how you do your work. On the bottom there, we have demands. So this is how much work you need to do. What are the demands of the things that you need to get done? There's another axis though here, which is also support. So strong social support versus weak social support. So where we see healthy work is when there is high control. You have a high control or a high level of autonomy around your work. When there are moderate demands, we know that low demands doesn't necessarily make us feel great, but too high demands is too much too. So we kind of know this from the work that we do with students, right? We want to have that zone of proximal development about like where are they challenged, but not too much. And then social support, strong social support. So high control, moderate demands, and strong social support is where we see levels of healthy work. Dangerous work happens when there are high demands, low level of control, and weak social support. So I want to think about each of these 3 things as we're going through here, and about how we can shift those from dangerous work, where I think most of us feel that many educators are, based on some of these organizational factors that are going on. And how do we move that? How do we move on each of these scales? So first, looking at the control scale. So how do we allow for increased control of the work? How do we help people how do we help them share ideas of what do you think would work better? Do you have ideas for how we could accomplish this goal or task in a different way? And just providing some opportunity for people to collaborate around those solutions, for them to have control in any situation that it's possible, will lower the risk of burnout. So then if we look at the demands, so if we lower demands, so I've heard a lot of discussions around this in my district, and I think that this is something that I'm seeing in education is people are recognizing like, okay, there's just too much right now. So how do we take things off people's plates? I think teachers have done a good job advocating for this, like something has to go. But just that simple question of like, if there was one thing we could find a way to take it off your plate, would that provide some relief? What is that? And so I put these questions in here as just things that maybe you can jot down as you're having conversations with people where they're feeling really stressed. Like these are some questions that you can use about thinking about how do we give them an increased sense of control? How do we lower those demands? And then the last one is support, right? How do we increase social support and fight isolation? So what opportunities could we create for that teacher that's really struggling for collaboration and connection? Or what could they engage in? What might be already happening that they could engage in? What's a place that we could create? So when you're thinking about how to support a teacher, that's one model to think about is how do we increase social support, lower demands, and support and give people's control. So just to summarize, the community as a whole needs to function well. We need to have administrators that are getting their needs met. We need to have teachers that are getting their needs met. We need support staff. We need maintenance people. We need paraprofessionals. And we need students and families. So if we can't focus on one element of our community and expect things to go well to the detriment of others. So curious, is there something at your school that seemed like a great idea when you made the decision, but it created unnecessary stress for staff? If there have been things that you have decided to take off people's plates this year, or maybe you should decide to take off people's plates? I know these are discussions that have been happening in school, so it might be helpful for other people to hear those as well. So I'm going to give you a chance to just pop those in the chat. I know that and whether it's PLC meetings or whether it's getting rid of some staff meetings or whether it's doing something with evaluations. It might be helpful for other people to hear kind of what are some of those things. Yep, but you got to be careful what you take off. Cindy, I see your comment. Yeah, taking something off the plate, but it ends up being the one thing that people actually enjoy and find helpful. Does not serve the purpose it was intended. Okay, I need to speed up here a little bit. So the third mistake I want to talk about is trying to fix the problem. I think that many of us are intuitively fixers, right? We want to make things better. We want to come in. Like, I think that's part of what draws us to this field. I'm a social worker by education, and like, oh yeah, I want to come in and I want to help and I want to make it better, right? But this is a situation that we can't fix. And so when we see people are struggling and we see how people are hurting, we want to fix it, right? But we can't fix this for people. And so for all of you that are carrying that burden of like, I want to make this better for people, I want to give you permission this morning to say, I can't carry this burden alone. I can't be the one who is in charge of trying to make this all better for everyone, even though people might want you to. They might be looking to you to do that. But I think we also sometimes hold ourselves to that standard. And that's not possible. And you're going to burn yourself out, right? That's the idea that that's too high of a demand on something that you have no control over. You're not able to control the well-being of each other, of the staff and people that you serve. So I think that what we want to try to do is just adjust our expectations. And again, think about how as a community, how can we support each other? And so the do this instead is this idea of supportive conversations. And I saw in the chat that many of you are doing circles. Many of you are doing and creating these spaces for colleagues to be in community with each other, to process and learn from their shared experience. And I think that's an ongoing need, so that one-time circle that maybe you did was great. And, I think sometimes we've done those in response to some events that may have happened in our communities. But there's an ongoing need for that connection, and how do we create those? So I think sometimes people get really kind of nervous about this idea of like, if I bring people together and we have a conversation, like there is so much that maybe could go wrong, and I might need to be there because, I need to make sure that it goes okay. And so I want to just address some of the common objections that I maybe get and just talk through those as we move forward. So I think one of them is that we're afraid it's going to turn into a bitch fest, right? Like all they're going to do is complain, and people are going to leave feeling worse. And my response is maybe, but that's happening already, right? Like for the people who really just want to get together and complain, or that, I don't know if they want to do that, but that's the only route that they know. There is definitely a chance that might happen in this meeting too. But I think my point is that it's happening already, right? So if it's not a reason not to try, because for some people, they do really need this positive outlet. They want to be able to talk about this, and the only conversations that are kind of available are maybe really negative and not helpful, and they end up feeling worse. So yes, they might bitch about what's going on, but that's okay because that's happening already. And so it's not because you tried to support them. It's not because you tried to create a space. It's just because that's where they are in that moment, and they don't have maybe the necessary skills in that moment to be able to do something different. Another reason that I think comes up is that, okay, if we want to do these circles, and I've been the one that's had to kind of lead those or organize those, and that's another thing, right? Like I don't want to ask my social worker or my counselor or me to do one more thing when we're already so overwhelmed. And so I think it's also asking your staff to come to one too. So I would think about making it voluntary. Like, I don't think any of this should be required. You're not required to share your feelings. We want to create opportunities. We want to create a menu that is available for people. And that some of my teachers don't like this touchy-feely stuff. And some of them do, right? So that's the importance of having this menu of options. It might be, and I know sometimes this gets some flack, but like sometimes I really believe in the power of play. And so sometimes playing a silly game is really good for some people, and it's a way to create community and laugh together. And that's really powerful. And there are some people who hate that kind of stuff too. So I think it's putting aside, maybe it can't just be the loud voices in the room or your own personal preferences about how we're creating experiences. I think we need to create a variety of experiences so people can find what works for them. So as you're thinking about pulling together this idea of these supportive conversations, I'm curious how comfortable you are with creating spaces for people to have authentic conversations. So I thought of kind of 3 ideas. There might be other reasons. So I please put in the chat if these don't fit. But one, okay, it makes me really nervous. And to be honest, I'm a therapist and it still makes me kind of nervous. So I get that. And I think people need it, but I'm not sure where to start. Or I'm not sure it would work if I was the one leading it. It might be that you're here today as the principal and you're like, I don't know if I'm the right person to start to lead this group, that it might be better, led by a peer-led group. So I'm curious, tell me in the comments, do any of these resonate with you? Are there other things that you think about how you feel? Okay. So Amy, let's come back. So Amy says, I feel pretty comfortable. However, I don't feel like this would be a direction our building admin is ready to go. I would encourage you to think about, as a member of this team, could I host this and see who comes, right? Like, would they be willing to let you, use some time after school to do this and just see? Yep, we would have to share it. So, right, I think just starting small, this doesn't have to be kind of what everybody needs. So if we're thinking about this, what do you need to take action? Like, what could this look like? What would be one small step that you could do to take action to building this sense of caring for each other as a community and creating this menu of options? It's already happening in bars already. Better to bring it back to the school. Right. I think we miss out. I think sometimes when it's happening in spaces outside of the school, right, it turns into this kind of them. Like I have to go outside of my community at school to get my needs met, even if those are some of those people. How do we create this sense of like we're all in it together? But I'm glad that people are finding ways to get their needs met, even if it is happening in the bar. So I want to share with you a resource that we have. So Resilience Impact has a resource called the Educator Resilience Blueprint, which is a program that is kind of a done for you option about leading some of these conversations. So it's a 5-lesson course designed to provide teachers and school staff with the tools and resources needed to manage stress associated with their work and facilitate a path to sustainable well-being. So it's a done for you kind of curriculum. If you purchase this, you get an online subscription that's ongoing and is for your entire school, where groups of people can come together to lead them through, give a little bit of teaching about some of these strategies that we're going to talk about, and have some discussion prompts to be able to have those conversations to build those systems of social support in your school. So thinking back to that demand control support model, how do we increase that social support? So each lesson has a 5-minute video of teaching on different topics about resilience. And on the next slide, I'll tell you what those topics are. They're all taught by me. And then it has discussion prompts for both individual and group reflection. And it's very flexible. You could, you could use some of the questions, you could only use the group questions, you could only do the individual questions, you could have people watch the video before, you could have people watch the video in the group. It's really made to be flexible, but it gives you those resources. So if you're leading it, or if your social worker's leading it, or your counselor or a grade level team wants to do it, it's a resource that you can provide so they don't have to do that thinking about what this might look like. It also, for those that maybe aren't as uncomfortable or aren't as comfortable with the idea of a circle or in circle facilitation, it provides some content and some structure, so it feels a little bit safer, I think, than the openness of a circle, which are super powerful tools, but I think require a higher level of comfort with the concepts, with that concept. So each lesson also has a list of micro actions associated with the learning that are practical strategies that can be implemented right away. And then it has activities to reinforce the learning. So it asks people to have a learning partner and then check in with each other about some of those micro actions. So again, optional if you tend to use that, but I think is a really powerful way, again, to bring that, build that social support and idea of community care in your building. It's about 30 to 45 minutes per session, super flexible on how you kind of want to do that. So 6 modules that are part of the program. So the first is just a introductory video of me kind of explaining what it is. And then there's the 5 lessons. So getting clear on your values and priorities, rethinking self-care. And again, kind of some of the stuff we talked about today, that it's not all about bubble baths, and it's not about finding those ways that you kind of treat yourself, but how do we have a sustainable path to wellness? Thinking about focusing your energy, paying attention to the positive and a gratitude practice, and then loneliness and community. And so any of these, they could be used in order. They're kind of created to use in order, but you could certainly pull out and say, okay, I want to do the lesson about paying attention to the positive. We're going to do that in as a full staff at one of our staff meetings, and just use that lesson as kind of a resource and a discussion starter of something that's ready to go for you. So again, each of them has a 5-minute video. It has a comprehensive downloadable workbook that you can print out and give to people. And it has some of those micro actions that you can take, a chance to be able to fill in your notes. Again, you don't have to use it that way, but it's something that you could if you wanted to. People sometimes appreciate a hard copy. There's given engaging, relatable prompts to encourage small discussions, so you don't have to be thinking of those yourself. And then there is a demonstration video for the person that might be facilitating this, that will, how to use the website and implement the course with your team. So if you hired somebody to come in like me and present on this topic, usually they might charge from $500 to $2,500. But I really don't believe you need an expert. I think the power of this work is in the group. The power of this work is in caring for each other. And I think it's really powerful if there's internal facilitation. So that might be one of your administrators, that might be, the second grade teacher, that might be a para. Anybody could pick this up and lead this as a conversation, either in a small group, they could do it individually, you could do it as a whole staff, however you want to choose to use it. So for your whole school to be able to use this as many times as you want on an ongoing basis, the cost is $397. So you can go to Resilience for Educators if you want to learn more, get some more information about this. And that's also where you would purchase and create your login and everything. But this is a resource for you. I think it's been really powerful. I have a couple of testimonials I'll share here with you in a minute. I developed this a little over a year ago. So we've had many schools that have been using this, and it's been fun to talk with them about, okay, now what do? We did that last year. How do we do it again? And I honestly think you could do it again. Again, when the power is in the group, this is just really a place for you to start the discussion. But if you're thinking, like Amy was thinking, like, I don't know if my admin would buy in. Okay. But how could you use it at your school? So I think you could provide it as a resource for grade level teams or PLCs to work together. Like it could be a group of friends that are otherwise going to the bar, but we're going to stop and do this, or we're going to come over to somebody's house. Like it's an idea of like, how do we have a place to have this conversation? You could use one of the videos in the staff meeting. You could offer the sessions facilitated by a leader, an instructional coach, your social worker, your counselor. It could be before and after school. It could be a lunch and learn opportunity, and you could offer CEUs. I think there's several lessons in there that you could fit some of the hours for early warning signs of mental health if you've had that initial training to, be an incentive for people to participate. And you can make it available for people to work through independently, and then maybe offer a debrief session to share key takeaways. So again, I know that several people that have purchased it have just done the videos individually and have found that really helpful as well. I don't think it's as powerful because you lose the group aspect, but here's a couple of testimonials that we got of people who've been through it. So this course enabled me to look within myself as an educator, friend, spouse, parent, and coworker to see what values I place upon myself and that of my coworkers as well as my family. So really getting clear on kind of, am I living into the values that I want, and increasing people's self-awareness. Like, are my choices matched with what I want my values to be, which is one of those, I think that's the first lesson. Second one here, this class is a powerful self-reflection and simple strategies for maintaining positive relationships that add to the growth of our personal, professional, and social well-being. So we do offer a 7-day guarantee. We want this to be helpful for you. If you get it and you're like, okay, this wasn't what I want, or I don't think this is a good fit, absolutely just let us know. We want to hear about how that experience was, but we will refund your money. We want you to be happy. If it's not helpful, please let us know. And we are also, like I said, we offer, one of our main things that we do is I offer conferences. So this last fall at the Trauma Informed Schools Institute, James Moffitt is a principal from Kansas, and he did a keynote on this idea, or on this topic of self-care is selfless and mental health is mandatory. And so he was one of our favorite keynotes during that conference. And so we are going to make that keynote presentation, I think it's about 45 minutes, available in the dashboard when you would log in. And so if you buy by February 28th, we're going to throw that into, I think it would be a great resource to do as a training or to watch individually. And he had some great things to say. So if you have any questions, I would love to answer your questions. Otherwise, my next slides are just kind of walking you through how you would register. But if there's anything that I can answer, or you're thinking about, would it work for this? I'd love to chat with you a little bit, either unmuting or putting it in the chat. Thanks, Amy. I'm glad that you found it helpful. Yes, I am. So we will be sending out a copy of this presentation. So we are going to clean up the recording and we will get it out to everybody who registered a copy of this presentation. along with a little information about the Educator Resilience Blueprint. Great, Becky. I'm glad you found it helpful. So just a couple quick things around, this is what it looks like when you log in. Oh no, this is when you register on the Resilience for Educators. You will sign up and create a login. And so that login, we can create logins for individuals at the school, or you could share your school login. So maybe be thoughtful if you are the one that's filling this out and what password that you choose, but we can always reset your password too. You're going to get, after you buy it, you're going to get an email, and then you're going to log into the course. So you're going to come back here and hit login, and then you're going to have course access. So it's all housed right here on this platform. So again, it could be 2 years from now and you're like, oh, I remember that Educator Resilience Blueprint, or that one lesson that I want to go back and watch, or I think that would be great for this team. You can come back here and it's available for you on an ongoing basis on this platform. Super easy to be able to navigate. Okay. I will stay on and ask questions or answer any questions. We're right at an hour. So I appreciate all of you being here, and we will get that certificate and the recording out to you. And thank you for your time. I'll hang around as long as people have anything they want to talk about.